Hamas has accused Israel of trying to reset negotiations by pushing to extend the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire agreement. A senior Hamas official said that the only way to secure the release of Israeli detainees is by adhering to the agreement, immediately entering negotiations for the second phase, and ensuring Israel fulfills its commitments. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned Hamas that if the remaining Israeli detainees are not released, there will be consequences they cannot imagine. His comments come as Israel this week introduced what it said was a new U.S. ceasefire plan, different from the one it agreed to in January, and is trying to force Hamas to accept it by imposing a siege on the Gaza Strip. Netanyahu referred to it as the Witkoff proposal, saying it came from U.S. President Donald Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff. But the White House has yet to confirm that, saying only that it supports whatever action Israel takes. Germany is calling on Israel to immediately allow unrestricted humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. Foreign Minister spokesman Sebastian Fischer emphasized that access to aid must be guaranteed at all times. Speaking at a press conference, he expressed Germany's deep concern over Israel's decision to block aid from entering the war-torn enclave. He also stressed that humanitarian access should never be used as a bargaining tool in negotiations. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society, the PRCS, has condemned Israel's blockade of humanitarian aid into Gaza, calling it a violation of international humanitarian law. PRCS urged signatory states to enforce these laws and demanded Israel reopen all crossings, including Rafah and Beit Hanun. Despite scaling up relief efforts since the ceasefire, the PRCS stressed that Gaza's humanitarian needs remain immense, requiring uninterrupted aid flow. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is calling on all parties to prevent renewed hostilities in Gaza, ensure the immediate flow of humanitarian aid, and secure the release of all detainees. Meanwhile, UN humanitarian chief Tom Fletcher described Israel's decision to block aid as alarming, stressing that international humanitarian law at Gaza daily, easing fears of famine. However, as news of the closure spread, residents reported a sharp rise in prices.
We need to get aid in and the hostages out, he said. Earlier on the weekend, Saturday, the Secretary General issued another...
Palestinians in Gaza are bracing for worsening conditions as Israel halts the entry of food and essential goods, a move that coincides with Ramadan and stalled ceasefire talks. Israel's decision follows the end of the first phase of the ceasefire deal, which failed to secure an agreement with Hamas on implementing a critical second phase. During the initial phase, humanitarian aid increased significantly, providing relief after months of food shortages. However, the UN and aid organizations now warn that the blockade will intensify hunger, with most of Gaza's 2 million residents relying on humanitarian assistance. Palestinians in Gaza's Qnews have gathered to mourn and pray over the bodies of 2 men killed by Israeli fire in Rafah. At least 2 people were killed by an Israeli drone fire in Rafah, and 3 people were wounded by a helicopter that fired on Qnews, raising fear among Palestinians that the ceasefire could collapse altogether after Israel imposed a total blockade on the shattered enclave. A first phase of a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas that began in January ended over the weekend with no agreement on what will happen next. According to local media, Israeli forces arrested at least one person in the town. Meanwhile, Israeli forces also arrested at least 2 people in Ramallah, said the Palestinian Information Center. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees has said it continues to provide mental health services and education in Gaza. The UN agency says its health teams have responded to 15,000 patients requiring mental health and psychosocial support since the start of the ceasefire in Gaza. It also said almost 260,000 children in the Strip have enrolled in the agency's distance learning program since January. Rafah municipality has announced that the Israeli occupation authorities disconnected power to the city's 2 seawater desalination plants. The municipality said that the occupation authorities cut off electricity to the seawater desalination plants that provide approximately 70% of the water supply of the residents of Rafah Governorate in the central Gaza Strip. The 2 plants combined produced approximately 20,000 cubic meters of desalinated water daily.